Every nanny quit after 1 week, every therapist gave up after 1 month, and 27 teachers refused to work with him because the billionaire's son was impossible, violent, destructive, and completely out of control, until the night janitor, who everyone ignored, started singing a lullaby in the empty hallway, and the boy who terrorized everyone suddenly went quiet. And what happened next shocked the entire mansion, because this single mom with 2 jobs and no fancy degrees did what child psychologists and elite specialists could not do. And the billionairesses who built empires and crushed competitors found herself watching this janitor work magic, and then she discovered the janitor's secret past and realized this woman was not just cleaning floors. She was running from something dark and dangerous, and now the billionairesses had to choose between protecting her son and protecting the one person who could actually save him. So stay until the end, because this story has twists that will break your heart and an ending that proves sometimes the people society overlooks are the ones with the most power. Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of the Montgomery mansion at 11:30 at night, when most of the world was asleep, but Maria was just starting her second shift, because being a single mom to 2 kids meant working the morning shift at the hospital as a janitor and the night shift at this billionaire estate, and she was exhausted, bone-deep tired, the kind of tired that made your soul hurt, but she could not stop because her kids needed food and rent was due, and her ex-boyfriend was in prison, and she had no one to help her, so she kept moving, kept cleaning, kept surviving. And tonight, as she mopped the 3rd-floor hallway, she heard something that made her stop: a child crying, not the normal crying of a kid who wanted a toy, but the desperate sobbing of someone in real pain. And Maria knew she should not get involved, knew that the staff had been told very clearly to stay away from young Master Damien, who was the 7-year-old son of billionairesses Victoria Montgomery, and who had a reputation for being absolutely uncontrollable. But Maria could not ignore a crying child. It went against everything in her, so she quietly walked toward the sound and found herself outside a massive bedroom with the door slightly open, and inside she could see a little boy sitting on the floor surrounded by broken toys and torn books, crying like his heart was shattered. And Maria knocked softly and said, "Hey, sweetie, are you okay?" And the boy looked up and his face was red and furious, and he screamed, "Go away," and threw a toy car at the door, and Maria dodged it and said, "I am not going anywhere until I know you are okay." And Damien looked shocked, because apparently no one had ever refused to leave when he told them to, and he said, "I will hurt you. I hurt everyone." And Maria stepped into the room and sat down on the floor a safe distance away and said, "I have been hurt before. I am tougher than I look." And Damien stared at her and said, "Who are you?" And Maria said, "I am Maria, I clean the floors here." And Damien said, "You are the janitor?" And Maria nodded and said, "Yes, I am the janitor." And Damien said, "Everyone says I am bad." And Maria looked at this little boy with tears on his face and anger in his eyes, and she said, "I do not think you are bad, I think you are hurting." And Damien went very still and said, "What?" And Maria said, hurt people, that is what my mama used to tell me when you are in pain sometimes. You lash out because you do not know what else to do." And Damien's voice got very small, and he said, "My mom does not love me." And Maria felt her heart crack, because she knew what it was like to feel unloved, and she said, "Why do you think that?" And Damien said, "She is never here. She is always working, always on her phone, always busy, and when she is here she looks at me like I am a problem she needs to solve." And Maria understood, because Victoria Montgomery was famous for being a ruthless businesswoman who had built a tech empire worth billions, but was also famous for going through nannies like other people went through tissues. And Maria said, "Sometimes adults show love in weird ways." And Damien said, "She does not even try anymore. She just hires people to deal with me, and they all leave because I am too much." And Maria said, "You are not too much, you are just right." And Damien looked at her like she had spoken a foreign language, and then he said, "Will you leave too?" And Maria said, "I am not your nanny, I am just the janitor, but I am here every night, and if you need someone to talk to, I will listen." And Damien nodded slowly, and Maria stood up and said, "Now, how about we clean up these toys together?" And Damien looked at the mess and said, "I do not want to." And Maria said, "Okay then, I will clean, and you can watch." And she started picking up broken pieces, and Damien watched her, and after a minute he got up and started helping, and they cleaned in silence. And when they were done, Damien said, "Maria," and she said yes, and he said, "Will you sing me a song my abuela used to sing to me before she died?" And Maria felt tears prick her eyes because she understood loss, and she said, "Of course, sweetie, what song?" And Damien said, "I do not remember the words, just the tune," and he hummed a melody, and Maria recognized it as an old Spanish lullaby her own mother used to sing, and she started singing softly, Derm derm negrito, cuta mama esta en el campo, and Damien's eyes got heavy and he climbed into his bed and Maria tucked him in, still singing, and by the time she finished the song Damien was asleep, and Maria quietly left the room and went back to her cleaning cart and did not think much of it until the next night, when she was mopping the same hallway and Damien's door opened and he peeked out and said, Maria, you came back, and Maria smiled and said, I told you I work here every night, and Damien said, will you sing to me again? And Maria looked around to make sure no one was watching and said okay. But just for a little while, and this became their routine. Every night Maria would finish cleaning the third floor and then spend 15 minutes with Damien talking or singing, or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, and Damien started to change. He was calmer, happier, more willing to sleep, and the staff noticed and started whispering about the miracle janitor who had tamed the wild Montgomery boy. And then one night, Victoria Montgomery herself appeared in the hallway, just as Maria was leaving Damien's room, and Victoria was tall and elegant in an expensive suit, even at midnight, and she said, you are the janitor, and Maria straightened her shoulders and said, yes ma, I am Maria Santos, and Victoria said, my head of staff tells me you have been spending time with my son, and Maria felt fear spike through her, and said, I am sorry ma, he was crying and I just wanted to help, I will stop if you want me to, and Victoria held up a hand and said, stop apologizing. I am not angry, I am curious. My son has gone through 27 caregivers in the past 2 years, therapists, nannies, teachers, all with impressive credentials, and none of them could handle him, but somehow you, a janitor, have managed to do what they could not, so tell me, what is your secret? And Maria did not know what to say because there was no secret, just compassion and understanding, but Victoria was looking at her with those sharp, intelligent eyes, and Maria said, I just treat him like a person, not a problem, and Victoria tilted her head and said, explain, and Maria took a breath and said, everyone who comes here sees a difficult child who needs to be fixed, but Damien does not need fixing, he needs to be heard and seen and loved, and Victoria's face flickered with something that looked like pain, and she said, you think I do not love my son? And Maria knew she was on dangerous ground, but she had never been good at staying quiet when something needed to be said, and she said, I think you love him very much, but I do not think he knows that, and Victoria's jaw tightened and she said, you have no idea what my life is like, the pressure, the responsibility. I am running a company with 10,000 employees, and I am doing it alone, and Maria said, I am a single mom too, I know about doing it alone, but our kids do not care about our excuses, they just want us, and Victoria stared at her, and for a moment, Maria thought she was going to be fired, but then Victoria said, I want to hire you, and Maria said, what? And Victoria said, not as a janitor, as Damien, full-time caregiver, nanny, companion, whatever you want to call it, I will triple your current salary from both jobs. And Maria's mind raced, because that kind of money would change her life, would mean her own kids could have things they needed, but she said, I do not have the right qualifications, and Victoria said clearly, qualifications mean nothing, my son responds to you, that is all the qualification I need. And Maria said, I have 2 kids of my own, I cannot just, and Victoria said, bring them here, the mansion is enormous, they can have their own rooms, go to the best schools, I will arrange everything, and Maria felt like she was in a dream. Because this did not happen to people like her did not get offers that sounded too good to be true, and she said, why are you doing this? And Victoria said, because my son smiled today for the first time in 6 months, and my head of staff said it was because of you, and I will do whatever it takes to keep him smiling, so will you take the job? And Maria thought about her tiny apartment and her 2 jobs and how tired she always was, and she thought about her kids, Miguel who was 9, and Sophia who was 6, and how they deserved better, and she said yes, and Victoria nodded and said, good, you start tomorrow. And Maria life changed overnight. Suddenly she was living in a mansion with her kids who could not believe their luck. Miguel got his own room with a computer, and Sophia got a room that looked like a princess castle, and Maria got a suite that was bigger than her entire apartment had been, and her job was simply to take care of Damien, which meant spending time with him, teaching him, helping him, and it was the easiest job she had ever had because Damien was not difficult. Once you understood him, he was just lonely and hurting, and Maria knew how to deal with that because she had been lonely and hurting too, and slowly Damien started to trust her, really trust her, and he started talking about his feelings, about how he missed his father who had died in a car accident when Damien was 4, and how he felt like his mother blamed him somehow, and how he acted out because at least when he was bad, people paid attention to him, and Maria listened and validated his feelings and taught him better ways to express himself, and Miguel and Sophia became like siblings to Damien, and the 3 kids would play together and laughed together, and Damien learned how to share and compromise and be gentle, and Victoria watched all of this from a distance, and Maria could see the longing in her eyes. The desire to be part of it, but also the fear that she had missed her chance. And one day Maria found Victoria sitting alone in her office late at night looking at photos on her computer, and Maria knocked and said sorry to interrupt, and Victoria quickly closed the laptop and said, "What do you need?" And Maria said, "Nothing, I just wanted to check on you." And Victoria looked surprised and said, "Check on me?" And Maria said, "You look sad." And Victoria laughed, but it was bitter, and she said, "I am a billionaire, Maria, I have everything." And Maria said, "Money does not fix loneliness." And Victoria's face crumpled just for a second before she got control again, and she said, "How do you do it?" And Maria said, "Do what?" And Victoria said, "Stay so strong. You are a single mother working impossible hours, and yet you are still full of love and patience, and I have every resource in the world, and I am failing my son." And Maria sat down across from her and said, "You are not failing him, you are just scared." And Victoria said, "Of what?" And Maria said, "Of not being perfect, of making mistakes, of being rejected." But kids do not need perfect parents, they just need present ones. And Victoria said, "I do not know how to be present. I have spent so long building this company, protecting our future, that I forgot to be part of the present." And Maria said then, "Start now, start today, it is never too late." And Victoria looked at her and said, "Will you help me?" And Maria said, "Of course." And so Maria started coaching Victoria, teaching her how to connect with Damien, how to listen without trying to fix, how to just be. And it was awkward at first. Victoria was used to controlling everything, and parenting could not be controlled, but slowly she started to relax, started to let Damien see her vulnerability. And one night Damien had a nightmare, and Victoria heard him crying, and instead of calling for Maria, she went to him herself and held him and rocked him and sang the lullaby she remembered from when he was a baby. And Damien clung to her and said, "Mommy," and Victoria cried and said, "I am here, baby, I am here." And Maria watched from the doorway and quietly backed away, because they did not need her anymore. And things were good for a while. The mansion felt like a home instead of a museum. Damien was thriving in school, making friends, being kind, and Victoria had cut back on work travel to spend more time with him. And Maria kids were happy and healthy, and Maria felt like maybe, just maybe, she had finally found stability. But then one morning Maria was making breakfast when there was a knock on the front door, and when the butler opened it, there were two police officers standing there asking for Maria Santos. And Maria felt ice run through her veins because she knew why they were there. And Victoria appeared and said, "What is this about?" And the officers said, "We need to speak with Ms. Santos about a warrant." And Maria closed her eyes and said, "I will go with you." And Victoria said, "Wait, what warrant?" And Maria said, "I will explain later, just please take care of my kids." And Victoria said, "Absolutely not, tell me what is going on." And Maria's voice shook as she said, "My ex-boyfriend, the father of my children, he is in prison for drug trafficking, and before he got arrested, he put some money in my account, dirty money, and I did not know until it was too late. And I was supposed to appear in court, but I ran because I was scared of losing my kids, and now there is a warrant for failure to appear." And Victoria turned to the officers and said, "Give us a moment." And she pulled Maria inside and said, "Why did you not tell me?" And Maria said, "Because people like you do not help people like me, people with criminal records and messy pasts. You would have never hired me if you knew." And Victoria said, "You are right, I probably would not have, but I know you now, and I know you are not a criminal, you are a victim." And Maria said, "The law does not see it that way." And Victoria said, "Then we change how the law sees it. I have lawyers, very good lawyers." And Maria said, "I cannot afford." And Victoria said, "I am not asking you to pay, I am offering, because you saved my son and I am going to save you." And Maria started crying and said, "Why would you do this?" And Victoria said, "Because you taught me what real strength looks like, and I am not going to let you face this alone." And so Victoria called her legal team, and they went to work, and it turned out Maria's case was not as bad as she feared. The money had been returned. The prosecutor was willing to deal in with Victoria lawyers, arguing that Maria was a single mother who had been manipulated by her abusive ex. The judge agreed to probation and community service, no jail time, and Maria sobbed with relief because she could stay with her kids. And Victoria held her and said, "You are safe now." And Maria said, "Thank you." And Victoria said, "No, thank you for showing me how to be human again." And life continued, and Maria stayed on as Damien caregiver, but she was more than that now. She was part of the family, and Victoria started to rely on her not just for childcare but for advice, for friendship, for support. And one day, Victoria said, "I need to tell you something." And Maria said, "What?" And Victoria said, "I am thinking about stepping down as CEO." And Maria said, "What, why?" And Victoria said, "Because I finally understand what matters, and it is not the company. "It is not the money, it is the time I have with my son, and I have already missed so much, and I do not want to miss any more." And Maria said, "That is a big decision," and Victoria said, "I know, but it feels right," and Maria said, "Then you should do it," and Victoria smiled and said, "You make everything seem so simple," and Maria said, "That is because it is simple, we just make it complicated," and Victoria laughed, and then she did something that surprised both of them. She reached out and took Maria's hand and said, "I do not know what I would do without you," and Maria squeezed back and said, "Good thing you do not have to find out," and there was a moment of something electric between them, something neither of them wanted to name, but both of them felt, and then Damien ran in asking for help with homework, and the moment passed, but it stayed with both of them, and over the next few months, things shifted. Victoria and Maria spent more time together talking late into the night about everything about their childhoods, their fears, their dreams, and Victoria found herself looking forward to seeing Maria every day, and Maria found herself thinking about Victoria in ways that confused and scared her because Victoria was her employer, was a billionaire, was so far out of her league, and yet there was something there, something real and tender. And one night after the kids were all asleep, Victoria poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Maria and said, "Can I ask you something personal?" And Maria said, "Sure," and Victoria said, "Have you ever thought about dating again?" And Maria laughed and said, "When would I have time?" And Victoria said, "If you did have time, would you want to?" And Maria said, "Maybe, why are you asking?" And Victoria took a breath and said, "Because I have been thinking about it," and Maria's heart started racing, and said, "About dating?" And Victoria said, "About you," and Maria stopped breathing, and Victoria continued, "I know this is inappropriate, and I know I am your employer, and I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea, but I cannot stop thinking about you." And Maria said, "Victoria." And Victoria said, "You can say no and nothing will change, I promise, but I needed you to know." And Maria set down her wine glass and said, "I think about you too all the time," and Victoria's eyes widened and said, "Really?" And Maria nodded and said, "But you are right, there are 1,000 reasons why this is complicated." And Victoria said, "So we do not do anything about it?" And Maria said, "I did not say that." And Victoria said, "What are you saying?" And Maria said, "I am saying maybe we stop over and just see what happens." And Victoria smiled and said, "I can do that," and she reached for Maria's hand, and Maria let her, and they sat there holding hands like teenagers, and it was sweet and terrifying and perfect. And they took it slow because they had to navigate the kids and the staff and the fact that Victoria was one of the most famous businesswomen in the world, but behind closed doors they built something beautiful, something based on trust and understanding and real love. And Damien noticed, of course, because kids always notice, and one day he said, "Maria, are you and my mom together?" And Maria said, "Would that bother you?" And Damien thought about it and said, "No. I think it is good. Mom is happy now, and you make her happy." And Maria hugged him and said, "You are an amazing kid, you know that." And Damien said, "I know, you tell me every day." And Miguel and Sophia adjusted to because they loved Victoria and loved living in the mansion, and it all felt like a fairy tale, except it was real. And 1 year after Maria had first been hired, Victoria made an announcement to the board that she was stepping down as CEO and promoting her second in command. And she was going to focus on philanthropy and family, and the business world was shocked, but Victoria did not care, and she started a foundation to help single mothers, because Maria had taught her how many women were struggling and needed support, and Maria ran the foundation because she understood the women they were helping in a way Victoria never could, and together they changed lives, and gave hope and built something meaningful. And on their anniversary, Victoria took Maria to the same hallway where they had first met, where Maria had been mopping floors and Victoria had been skeptical, and Victoria said, "Do you remember this?" And Maria said, "How could I forget?" And Victoria said, "I was so broken then and I did not even know it, and you fixed me." And Maria said, "I did not fix you, I just loved you." And Victoria said same thing, and she got down on one knee, right there in the hallway, and pulled out a ring and said, "Maria Santos, will you marry me?" And Maria was crying and laughing, and she said, "Yes. Yes, of course yes." And they kissed, and somewhere down the hall they heard 3 kids cheering because Damien and Miguel and so had been spying, and Victoria laughed and said, "I guess we are doing this." And Maria said, "I guess we are." And they got married in a small ceremony with just family and close friends, and it was perfect and simple and full of love. And years later, when people asked Victoria what her greatest accomplishment was, she never said, "Building a $1 billion company" or "revolutionizing technology." She said, "Learning how to love from a janitor who saw me when I was invisible." And that was the truth, because Maria had taught her that wealth was not measured in money but in connection and family, and the courage to be vulnerable, and they lived their life together raising their kids, running their foundation, and proving that love could bloom in the most unexpected places between a billionaire and a janitor. Between two broken people who found wholeness in each other, and the mansion that had once been cold and empty became warm and full of laughter and music and the sound of children playing. And sometimes, late at night, Victoria would find Maria in that same hallway and pull her close and say thank you, and Maria would say for what, and Victoria would say for saving my son, and Maria would smile and say you saved him, you just needed someone to show you how, and Victoria would kiss her and say no, you saved all of us, and Maria would rest her head on Victoria's shoulder and think about how far she had come from cleaning floors to running a foundation, from barely surviving to truly thriving. And she would whisper, I love you, and Victoria would whisper it back, and they would stand there in that hallway where it all began, holding each other, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought them together.